Hi, it's Graham Coath. Today is Thursday this week, just in case you're confused by the day of the week. And it's just gone 1 o'clock. And it's Wow Ergonomics with me and Steven Howe. Hi, Steven. How's your week been?
Hi, Graham. Busy. I was exposed to homeschooling yesterday, which I think has left me shell-shocked probably for the rest of the week. So it's good so far. But that was an experience. It's a word that is said very easily at the moment, but the reality of it is very different. So yeah,
I wanted to start with that today. I wanted to make today slightly different as a show, because normally we have, say, 4 or 5 distinct topics and we go through them, and I still want to sort of center on a couple of topics. But given our conversation about that homeschooling piece, and I've been very fortunate this time round because my wife is a critical care worker, that the 2 youngest are in school. My elder 2 are here homeschooling, but they can pretty much get on with it. But I know so many people who are trying to juggle working from home at the moment and homeschooling. I thought it's worth giving a few minutes to it, and then perhaps talking about that from the ergonomic perspective as well, and just, you know, are we cut out for it in terms of that, and you know how important that is. So just talk to us as a parent, first of all, as a human being.
Yes.
How was it?
From the office, which is where I am now, well, that looks like a bedroom's an office, I can hear what goes on most of the time. And sometimes then go downstairs to experience the reality of it. So it was what I expected to be. I mean, I've got similar to you. I don't have 4, I have 2. I have one who's more than happy to get on with it himself. The other one is a little bit of a less reluctant student, shall we say. It's just the constant desire for breaks. You just get started on a subject. I just need 5 minutes. I just need 5 minutes. I just need to go and do this and do that. And you can't get any flow. And I think it's just trying to keep the interest is the problem. I mean, teachers have done a fabulous job. You know, the school that my youngest son goes to have done a fabulous job with the work they're preparing and everything. But I think the difficulty is there's certain things they're covering would be interesting in a classroom environment with a group of other children. I think the difficulty then trying to replicate that as a parent on a subject you're not maybe totally sure about is proving very difficult. And I think that was my experience. Where subjects where you could keep the focus there, it was pretty straightforward. But once you start going off into other areas, and I think the difficulty for parents is, and for me it would be, I've always been quite good at the math side, so I'm quite comfortable with that. I'm not great with the English and the literature side. You ask me to write a work email, I'll do it, no problem. You start asking me to look around the themes of certain things, and that's where I find it difficult. So I think that the issue for parents, I guess, or my issue tends to be is the subjects where maybe your child isn't as interested and maybe weren't your strengths. And that's where you're sort of having to step into the boots of a teacher to sort of cover off areas where the child maybe isn't as interested. But of course, a teacher obviously will have the necessary skills and experience to do that, where we're almost coming in as yes, I understand you're not that interested, but also it wasn't my strength. And I think that's where the butting of heads commences.
Well, now it's interesting you should say that, and I'm going to sort of bring up the sort of ergonomic element of this into this subject in a minute. But I was actually having a conversation yesterday with a guy that I've known for years, who we know each other from radio days. So we both used to present. That's where we met each other. We've both got a background in terms of presenting and making information work across the network, as it were. And he, for a number of years now, has been a brand ambassador for a company. And one of his strengths is, talking about a brand and actually getting, people to be aware of something online. Okay, so, we've got these particular skill sets. Now, his wife is a teacher, and we were in this conversation, we were saying, actually, yes, teachers have done a fantastic job, etc., etc. You know, yes, they're doing the best they can. However, actually, when it comes to teaching in the environment of doing this online and using all of the tools of being online, etc., it's not going quite so well. And it's actually partly because teachers are not told how to do these things. So in a way, part of the issue is actually partly to do with the fact that teachers themselves don't necessarily have these digital skills in order to know how to best relay this information to the students online in an engaging way. Yeah. All right. Yes, there's kind of a gap between the, you know, what the students are having to do with the teachers and what the students are doing with their parents as well. And, you know, there's a shortfall there. But also, you know, he's been doing some work, for example, with his wife in terms of teaching her, you know, this is how you use a mic. This is where you should be looking when you're engaging with students. This is, you know, why. I'll give an example. You know, why say to the students at the other end, now, wouldn't it be good, girls and boys, if we all do some sums, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a sum now, and I want you all to write it down on a bit of paper and then hold it up, right? Naming no names. I was in a Zoom call like this the other day because I occasionally on a Friday we do some homeschooling. So, you know, and then what happens is they go, so what's 2 + 2? And the students are all writing it down as quickly as possible on their bit of paper. And they go, now show me all of your results.
Yeah.
Can you move this? That's it, Jim. No, that way. Yeah. Right. And it descends into absolute chaos. Yeah. Right. And in the throes of that conversation, we go, so, you know, there has to be some teaching here about, you know, provide teachers with some resources whereby, you know, there are pieces of software that you can use where if they've all got their iPad or whatever anyway, where you can go, right, I'm going to put some sums up on the screen and you're all going to put your answers in, and then we're going to have a look at the answers. You know, you can make it much more interactive through the technology, but not if you haven't got those resources there, and not if you haven't got the skill set around it.
I think the most the funny thing that came from yesterday was there was that is exactly what my 9-year-old son was doing with maths. Do the sum, hold it up. He was quite quick at getting the answer back. Then whilst he was waiting for the others to get their answers back, he would then sort of get out of his chair and start doing Fortnite dances to the rest of the classroom and all sorts of stuff, which was very funny, but clearly distracting potential of the pupils. So I think it was actually, it was 9-year-olds using the correct behavior in front of the camera is not always the easiest thing to do as well.
But that's why if it's done with the right technologies and it's done in the right engaging way, because actually, you know, as I say, if you get that experience where, you know, the teacher's busily trying to see, has Johnny got the right answer, has Cynthia got the right answer, they can't see, then it all descends into chaos. Whereas actually, you know, if it's more of a game and it's more interactive in the moment, he would be in there watching and he'd be going, no, look, I'm leading, I've got mine right. So you'd keep him there. And teaching's about that. You know, when you take it online, it has to be about keeping people in the moment. And you know, and we, as I say, we weren't knocking teachers at all in that conversation. His wife is a teacher, but you know, his wife was saying to him, I don't have the same digital skills that you have because you've had the background in that, but I need those skills if I'm going to teach effectively in this way. So it brings a whole interesting dynamic. Now, the other thing about all of this as well is that, and the conversation, we saw it sort of open up on LinkedIn over the last few days again as well. And there's been posts right from the beginning of the first lockdown where we've seen a few children sneak in because in photographs or whatever, but is just the ergonomic piece around homeschooling. And someone did raise the point yesterday, and it's a really valid point, that we do need to teach our children the right way to do all of this stuff, because and we made mention of it in the last show that we did. If we don't actually show children that there's a right way to sit and there's a right way to set up your equipment in order to avoid injury, etc., then they're not going to do it themselves.
No, I think that what we always say, Graham, is the worst setup generally is, I mean, we referenced this on last week's show, is the dining room table, isn't it? With the fact the table is too high and the chair is too low. And I'm guessing that, it's got to be well over 95% of the children being homeschooled are going to be sat at a dining room table, aren't they? So, we've always identified that as one of the worst setups for an adult. And yet the majority of children are going to be sitting that way at the moment, aren't they, doing their work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and maybe not necessarily the dining room table. It might just be that, have laptop will travel. It's lying on the floor, prostrate, but the head up like this, using the laptop, and the wonderful thing is, when you're young, is that all things bend that way naturally. And it doesn't seem to cause any injury, but at the same time, it's not necessarily great for the body. And obviously, when you get to our age, Stephen, lying on the lying on your belly on the floor with a laptop, you just not, it's a struggle to get down there in the first place. So you're just not going to go there,
and even harder to get back up,
and totally difficult to get back up. You just know, especially if one of your kids meanwhile comes and sits on your backside while you're doing it, and then you try and get up, and it's like, I knew I shouldn't have done that. So you would avoid it in the first place. But when you're young and nimble, you will try and adopt these different postures throughout the house. But it doesn't mean to say that long term that could cause some damage. But it's also about habit forming. If we don't actually address and talk to our young people about the right way to make sure that the monitors are at reasonable height, so you have a more open posture, and yet there's not the pressure on your neck and your shoulders, etc., at an early age. Make sure you're not slouching or hunching over at an early age. Then it gets into the psyche, But if we just leave it and go, well, do you know what? They're young, they can do it. It doesn't matter. They're snap back afterwards. We're not doing anybody any favors. And it's interesting watching the comments on some of these posts where, parents are beginning. It's a slow process, but parents are beginning to understand for their own working environment that they need to perhaps take a little bit more care and consideration. And they know that because they're feeling the aches and the pains from not doing it properly. But then they're not necessarily thinking, well, but Johnny's in that room, and Cynthia's in that room down the corridor, etc. And what are they doing?
I think the thing is, Graham, we've always sort of described this whole COVID situation as a huge sort of social experiment around home working, and how it's really dragged the UK forward, because we've always been a little bit behind our sort of continental colleagues, as it were. Maybe one of the good things that will come out is that people are in the future working in better postures, which we've said, is because it's almost been forced on them. It's forcing people to be exposed to our world of ergonomic solutions, but also the fact if children are having to do it, they're going to catch on at an earlier age. So maybe we'll prevent some of the issues that we'd normally see in a few years' time, because actually people are more used to working in the correct posture with the right type of setup. So maybe that will help the digital workers of the future potentially with as a result of this home working piece, be it for work or be it for school.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope so. I mean, I think that would be tremendous if we could do that. Now, the main subject that we wanted to touch on today is something around DSE assessment. So first of all, we ought to actually define, for people that don't know what DSE stands for. It stands for
display screen equipment.
Display screen equipment, which in itself is a bit of an old-fashioned term now, really.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? I mean, it literally should mean anything that's got a display screen. So we're all doomed by that nature, because thinking about it logically, once upon a time when that term was coined, the only thing that had a display screen really was a computer.
Yes.
Apart from the odd printer or whatever that had a fairly big display screen as well. But nowadays, a display screen is on anything, and the computer is within anything. So really, it broadly should actually cover anything from the computer in front of you down to your laptop, tablet, or your smartphone, whatever, you know. And I think one of the first main articles I ever wrote on LinkedIn is possibly still kicking around there in the eons. Was a piece about mobile phone use, because I was sat in a cafe in London, just down from Waterloo, and I was looking out at this scene in front of me. There was a guy walking along in a high-vis jacket, safety hat, etc. as well, and he was looking down at his phone, and then he walked into a lamppost.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was just
brilliant.
and I captured it on a photo cruelly, and wrote a piece about it. And for me, it was just saying, like, you know, it was sort of like, you know, high-vis jacket, or he had, you know, high-vis jacket, safety hat, and yet the danger was the phone.
Yeah.
Right. And it was all about, you know, we've become a nation of looking down and looking there all of the time, and we actually take our eyes off of what's around us as well, because of this sort of thing. But, you know, display screen equipment assessments have their history in HSE documentation, and it's I think for a lot of companies, they just don't realize that this recommendations set of writings from a governing body, the Health and Safety Executive, exist. I mean, start us off for 10 on this, but I'm amazed still in this day and age that we still have people that are completely ignorant to the fact that there's actually some guidance here.
And I think that word there itself, Graham, potentially explains part of the problem. You've mentioned two words there, guidance and recommendations. I think the fact that it isn't, you know, written in blood in law, I think that allows a huge get out for a lot of organizations. I mean, you know, I speak to you know, various end user organizations. I speak to friends of mine who work for all sorts of businesses, whether it's from law firms to banks or whatever. And I'm still to find any of them who've had some sort of official DSE assessment. And you know, I'm talking large organizations. And I think that's the fact that because it is not the law, it is a recommendation. And I think it's simply bypassed or ignored. You know, I've whenever I do training sessions, people talk to me about, okay, you know, talking about our solutions, but what's the law? What's the legal side? What have they got to do? And you sort of go back to people and say, well, I can tell you what the guidance is. I can give you a link to the HSE website and talk about the guidance around this. But the law is not going to, the law does not force an organization to do it. So I think that's probably where the core of the problem for me, Graham, is the fact that it is something that where there is a bit of a get out of jail free card for organizations. It's a recommendation, therefore, well, we'll get round to it when we do. And probably they don't ever.
Now, when we were talking about this yesterday prior to the show, you sort of delved in there in terms of the latest updates on the HSE website, etc. What sort of things were you finding that you thought that we ought to bring out to tell people today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing for me, I mean, there's two pieces on the HSE website. One of them is sort of a COVID update, and one of them is sort of the long-standing thing. But I mean, there were a couple of things that really sort of stuck out for me. I think one of them is naming a time. So if I just sort of literally quoted very quickly, the health and safety display screen equipment regulations apply to workers who use DSE daily for over an hour or more at a time. So I thought that was quite interesting, that it names a time frame and says if you're doing it, working for over an hour, that's where you sort of fall into the category of, yes, I need an assessment. So I think it was quite interesting that a recommendation's made and linking a time. I think the other thing that was quite interesting was talking, I'm just jumping back to it quickly, was talking about providing an eye test if a worker asks for one. So
Yes.
Again, I thought that was quite interesting, and thinking, I've heard of one or two organizations who do that. And you think, as we've said, the screens, DSE is not just the laptop, it's the smartphone, it's the tablet, it's whatever it is. The huge pressure on the eyes, especially at the moment where we are all working this way. Again, I do wonder, because it's a recommendation, how many organizations are offering eye tests? Probably as few as possible, but it does stipulate if an employee asks for it. So again, the get out there is, if someone doesn't ask for it, is an organization going to offer something up that's going to have a cost for them? So I think those two sort of things all sort of tie in nicely to say, look, there's some good recommendations there, but I think businesses just see it as that, recommendations. And I think that's probably where maybe this is one of the things that will come out, Graham, on the back of the whole COVID situation. Will this force a tightening up, or will it be seen as, well, some businesses have been struggling, do we want to enforce additional costs onto them?
Okay, I'm going to pick up on both those points. So,
yeah.
So the first point, which is about the time element of it, I think it's a really interesting area. And I've had this debate long and hard with my wife over the years, because she's a dental nurse.
Okay.
Right? She doesn't believe that she needs to have a DSE, display screen equipment assessment, as part of that. But it's, from my point of view, I think that anyone working in that kind of industry should have a display screen equipment. Now, that's because, hey, this is my background, and and I can see the potential hazards with not having a display screen equipment review, because they are working with computers. Yep. But I understand it from the other perspective, and I think it's a good story to tell, because it might be that this is something that people can relate to out there. Her argument would be, the reason she doesn't need to have one, or that her business shouldn't be involved in doing one, etc., is because actually the primary element of her job, and primarily what she's doing, is interfacing with the client, holding suction, handing tools to the dentist, etc., making amalgam up, etc. However, during every single client, there's a bit of interaction on the computer. There's charting, there's doing, plotting all of the teeth, etc. There's some writing up of notes, etc. as well. So she is using the computer for several hours during the day.
Yeah.
Right. If she works down on reception, she'll be using the computer for several hours during the day. But whether she's doing it for any prolonged period of time during the day, which adds up to an hour or more in one go, maybe or maybe not. All right. So that's quite interesting. And I think thereby, talking about your get out clause, that's quite an interesting story. My argument would be, is there still potential risk there? So if you look at legislation, or not legislation, but if you look at HSE guidance, etc., you could probably come away with that and say, no, anybody working in that profession does not need to have an assessment, because actually it's broken up time. It's not a prolonged period of time at all. But having said that, when they are using it, are they forced to, stand at a fairly peculiar angle to use it? Because, in a dentist surgery, for example, it's not like you have necessarily a nice place to sit. You might be moving between here and there. There could be all sorts of issues in terms of posture and when you are using display screen equipment. And actually over a day, you are using it for quite a long time.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the second thing, the eye test thing.
Yeah.
Why should people have eye tests? Or why should companies be involved in people having eye tests? Now, I have to say, when I've been working with companies in the past and I've set up their DSE assessments for them, I have always included eye tests in that, right? And for advice to companies, I would always recommend that companies include information about eye tests, etc., at induction as well, right? And again, it's why should you be doing that, right? And the reason you should be doing that is ultimately because if someone comes and joins the company at this point in their career and you have not got a benchmark for, how bad their eyes are or what prescription that they actually need at that point, and you do not monitor that periodically, and the DSE assessment is a good mechanism for monitoring that, then how do you know whether or not their eyesight has deteriorated in the period that they've been working from you? And do you know whether it could potentially or not have any correlation to the fact that they're doing display screen work with you or not? And if you don't monitor that, are you or are you not leaving yourself open to being prosecuted for deterioration of eyesight over a period of time because you haven't actually benchmarked it or monitored it? The answer to that is yes, you are.
I mean, the thing you said earlier, Graham, is the interesting one, I think, going back to the first point, is stating a time. Whilst you were running through your example with your wife there, I was thinking to my head, so someone who does 50 minutes, there's a get out, as it were. You don't qualify. Someone who does an hour and 15, you qualify. And it was interesting. I saw a post on LinkedIn this morning that I've seen before, and it talked about the weight of your head and comparing it to a bowling ball.
Yeah.
I can't. Is it 8 pounds?
A big bag of sugar, if not.
Yeah. And almost saying, if you sit for 50 minutes with that, looking down at, let's say, for example, a laptop or a tablet, that huge pressure it's creating on your neck and your shoulder. So what the regulation is almost saying is if you're doing that for 45 minutes, crack on. If you're doing it for an hour and 5, then actually you do qualify for some sort of assessment. And that's where, so, what if you're doing like your wife? What if you're doing 3 45-minute sessions throughout the day? You don't qualify. But if you're doing a 2-hour session, which is pretty similar time overall, you do that to me is, once you start putting times in, it starts to be, it then becomes down to interpretation, doesn't it? There we go. Thank you, James.
James has interrupted us there with precise details. 4.5 to 5 kilograms for the weight of the head, which is a lot on the cervical spine. So it's something that has to be taken into consideration. So interestingly, in what you have said there is, the time factor gets you out of it, right? Yeah. However, take this back to our first conversation about young people being able to spring back, right?
Yeah.
What is 50 minutes? What is 50 minutes with your neck down there for somebody that's 15, 16? What is 50 minutes for someone with their neck down there if they're 55? What is 50 minutes for someone down there with their neck down there or in a particular position if they're getting into their 60s or whatever, So, and then what if that person has a particular condition, You know, what if they've already got a spinal condition? You know, if I've already got a weakness in my cervical spine, surely that has more of an impact in terms of that there. So it clearly, these things cannot be defined by time alone. And therefore, we've got to find, I think, a more a better way through this than the sort of woolly kind of let's leave it to, you know, distinctions of time, etc. There, etc. My personal view, and it's always been there in this whole issue, is this is about care of staff at the end of the day.
Yeah,
you know, this should be. It doesn't really matter what health and safety executives say, although that's great that they've got something there. But actually, it's about what you either want to do proactively or reactively for your staff. Yeah. And if you want to make the DSE process a reactive process for your staff, or you just don't care about it at all, then the biggest risk for you is that your staff are going to get injured or your staff are going to leave you because actually you're not taking care of your staff and their particular needs. If you want to be proactive about it, then actually it's another way of you showing your staff that you absolutely care for them and that you're considering, the problems that they might be facing, or, you're anticipating the issues that they might face if their workstation setup, etc., isn't right.
We did a webinar about just before Christmas, first week of December, Graham, and we invited a guy, Jonathan Waters from my in-house lawyer, who came and did a session around the whole legal side of working from home. And one of the first things he touched on was the fact that as an employer, from a sort of a health and safety perspective, you are responsible for risk assessment of your staff wherever that member of staff is working, and the things start to tie in, because suddenly if you then if there's no risk assessment taken and no DSE assessment taken, an employer has an issue with it, then as an employer, you're leaving yourself very exposed to someone to say, well, actually, hang on, my employer was responsible for my my risk assessment at home and did not undertake a DSE assessment, and I now have this problem. It certainly stacks the cards against the employer from defending themselves in that situation, doesn't it? Because they're neither carrying out their sort of care of duty or taking out the assessment that would potentially cover all of those issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just think that we've got to get back to here a point that I've raised over years now, which is that if you were in a different kind of industry, and traditionally, we had a lot more manufacturing, especially in the Southwest than when we perhaps have now. If you were in a factory and someone was working at a machine that you perceived to be dangerous because it had, something that you pull down which cuts a hole in some metal or something, and then you move it across to the side, and then something else cuts it, and potentially, you could get bits of metal up into your eyes, so you need to wear a visor, and how you lift whatever it is that you're taking off to put it on a pallet over there, you need to think about that. And so you would have some manual handling training, etc. You would do all of that because you would in your head, you'd go, I know there's risk there.
Yeah.
This is obvious. Someone could lose a limb. Someone could get something in their eye, something, they could damage their back, and I could get sued. And that would not be good for the business. We just have not got into our psyche yet that actually we're in a generation now where we are using display screen equipment for a lot of our day, right? Employers have to recognize, whether it's within their auspice or not, that actually a lot of people go home from work and get on another laptop, or sit on their phone, or use a tablet, or play on an Xbox or something else, where they're then sat in front of a screen for hours as well. Right? As said in previous shows, I actually had someone on one of my posts say, they were proud about the fact that they've sat for 18 hours a day in the same chair without moving, because they moved from IT work to gaming work. All right. We've just got to understand that this is the same risk, and as I wrote in another article once, and I know I've mentioned this before, but excuse me if you've heard this story before, but I wrote a piece about someone that had a car accident, and then someone that had developed injuries, if you like, to their back and their arms, etc., over a 30-year, and their neck over a 30-year period of sitting at the desk and working for intense hours at the desk. And the injuries were the same. Yeah. Right. So there is some catastrophic injury that can occur with people. And you and I, over the years, and certainly any assessor that's been out there, will have seen some people that are absolutely at the end of their tether in terms of their physical ability now, and struggling to walk with either sticks or a frame, etc., to get to their desk, and then it's painful to sit down or to stand up. They have to they feel like they have to have everything supported, etc. And that's possibly come on from just they may have an underlying condition there, but it's been exacerbated by years and years and years of sitting to work. But we haven't even reached a generation yet where we've had anyone that's started that from a young age and gone all the way through. Because when for me, the first time I had a computer was when I was a teenager at home, but we played it for a couple of hours and then then went off and kicked a football, etc. And then computers didn't really come in until after university age, right? And then you started getting into it a bit more. Now kids are doing it from this high, sorry for anyone that's listening on Spotify, but from a very young age, kids are using computers all the time. And we just don't know what the implications of that's going to be in terms of, any musculoskeletal disorders or back issues, etc., if they prolong use that over the period of their life. So I think we've just got to get real about it and actually go that this is actually a real threat, because nobody sees a computer as a threat. Nobody sees sitting at a desk in a chair in front of a computer. It's not going to cut your arm off. It's not going to cut your head off. It's not, you're not suddenly going to bleed profusely or whatever. So why do we need to risk assess that area? Because it's dangerous.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, clearly for me, there has to be some sort of legislative sort of tie down to this whole thing that's a little bit open, as we said before. But I think it's also a bit of a hearts and minds thing as well, isn't it? We've got to get organisations wanting to proactively look after their health and well-being of their staff, not just doing it because a piece of law says they have to. Yeah, okay, that will make sure it happens, but actually seeing it as something that is within their duty of care, that they should be doing it. So that's I think there's a two-pronged attack, really, isn't there? There's a legislative piece, but then there's also a sort of a company policy strategy piece to really tackle it.
Yeah. Do you think there's a divide here between big companies and small companies as well, Stephen? Is that something you think you've seen, or does this run across the board?
I think it's a bit across the board. I mean, just again, friends who work for large organisations, and taking it back to where we come from as an organisation is in providing equipment, even if there is no DSE assessment in place. I know friends who work for large businesses doing a lot of time on laptops who aren't given any sort of assessment, but aren't given any type of accessory either. So, which of course the accessories, yes, can come as part of the assessment, but they can also be issued independently of that. But no, I think it's across the board. I don't think it's necessarily the small companies are doing it and the large ones aren't, or vice versa. I think it's very much across the board. I don't think it's sector specific. You hear of people in both private and public sector where there is investment in some geographical areas and not in others. So I think it's totally across the board. I think it's not as simple as saying we need to go and tackle that area or that area or that size of business or that size of business. I think it's an across the board piece for me, in my experience. Again, if people have, for the people who are listening in, have sort of seen anything different, by all means chat away. But I don't think it's specific to one area. I think it's across the whole economy, both public and private sector.
Well, we've just been joined by a special guest, so we'll bring him in. Hello, Karim. How are you? We can't hear you. You need your microphone on. He's very quiet for him. I mean, I normally he's all over it in terms of sound, but I can't actually hear him at the moment. I'll tell you what, we'll put you back in the holding area. See if you can get your microphone working. And
what is it working now?
Oh, there it is.
There he is. Hey, Karim.
Hello. Hi, Steve. How are you? You all right?
Hey, good. Yes, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Sorry, you know what? I didn't know about this studio, so I was just trying to join in and clicking here, there, everywhere. So yeah, managed to get myself in. Yeah.
We're just talking about display screen equipment regulations, the HSE, etc.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a lot of echo there. Am I coming out of the speakers?
Yes, it is. I mean, thing is absolutely fine. But I'm just thinking, yeah, it is regulated, isn't it? But I don't think so many people still understand that they're still working from home. It is still employers' responsibility to provide all the right equipment for people to work from home. And I think people are a little bit scared to ask for it. I was talking to one of the clients yesterday, and he said, I only started the job 6 months ago. I don't know if I should ask for it. And I said, for your health and well-being, you should raise your concern if you're not comfortable. Otherwise, you are injuring yourself for a longer period of time. What later on, if your employer says to you, why didn't you ask for it? Then where the responsibility lies, actually. If you don't ask, you don't get. So he said, no, I'm going to be brave and just ask for it. And he did ask, and it worked for him. So yeah, I think people just need to speak up.
Well, yeah, but then a lot of people are worried that if they do speak up, they're going to lose their job.
Yeah, so it's a swing on both sides, actually, But I personally think, in a nicer way, if you do raise a concern, I think it will work, because at the end of the day, if people are working for a business and they are fully employed by the business, I think that falls still into their responsibility. And you know what? HSC has this guideline on their website, so I think people must refer back to it.
Yeah. Now, you've only come into the sector fairly recently, but I know you've got a team behind you that are doing the assessment side of things. Apologies, by the way, if people are hearing echo, because I think it's because Karim hasn't got headphones.
No, I don't have a headphone. No, I can find somewhere and then put it, but yeah.
Yeah, that would help, because otherwise I'm coming out your speakers. Let me just mute his mic while I say the question. So, brilliant. You've just been in this, Karim, you've been in this area a short while, but you have a team of assessors going out there. Is it larger companies you find that are kind of shirking the responsibility to do assessments, or is it all companies?
You know what? When you go to, so for example, it's not myself, as you know, I don't do the assessment. We make chairs. We have all kind of ergonomic solutions. We don't do the assessment. The people who have done the assessment, and you know what? When you turn up, even when employees are working from home, they really appreciate that. The kind of like the difference it makes, actually. The whole assessment side, and they get the right products to work with when they're working from home. So yeah, it does work for people, but I think people need to understand the value behind it and take it as an investment in their well-being on the longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the important things from my point of view with that, the value of that independent assessment piece, and a lot of people don't understand what the assessment piece does is an assessor that's trained to do a workplace assessment can look at an environment, talk to the person about the way that they work, talk to the person about any of the injuries that they've had previously, or any particular conditions that they've got, take all of those things into consideration, and can then look at building a solution for that person that's not necessarily just around product either, but also other adjustments. It might be, speech technology, or it might be, coping strategies, or anything else that can enable that person to work more effectively, more productively within that company. So it can actually aid productivity, etc. as well. From both of you's perspective, I know, Stephen, you come from a particular manufacturer, but how important is it that actually within that area that, by going through that assessment piece, what that person actually ends up with is what's right for them, not really just what somebody wants to sell, and that there's as much variety as possible that can be recommended by that assessor. Quite often I've recommended things through that assessment process that the supplier of that company haven't got a supplier for, a supply of, but I've said, no, categorically, you're going to have to go out and source this because this is right.
I think you're right, Graham. I think this is why the key is that independence of that sort of assessment and that access to such a wide range of products. Because, I think we touched on this last week, didn't we? Or was it the week before, where we were talking about how it's open, this whole sort of COVID social experiment has opened up the market for products in our area, and suddenly you've got hundreds and thousands of new buyers, and the risk is, of course, is that people will simply go and look online to try and buy product without getting that advice. Yes, absolutely, I come from the Baccarel side, but equally there's a lot of other good manufacturers out there who will do products that maybe we don't do and couldn't help certain people. So it is important that there is obviously access to a range of products, but I think it's getting the right advice and buying the right product. My concern, going back to this sort of original point, is that people are simply going to shop online and not take advice, and they're going to end up sort of buying twice or three times to get the right product. So that's where the link piece between the individual end user and the solution is that assessor to recommend. There are lots and lots of very good assessors out there, and their experience and knowledge should be leaned on to make sure they're getting the right equipment to help that person, rather than leaving it up to someone who's maybe not got the knowledge of the sector and the solutions, who may even go and buy something that actually makes the problem worse. So it's really, really important that assessor is sort of brought into the whole process and really assesses the issue and creates the right solution for that individual end user. And that will, as you will know, Graham, will just differ across a whole organization. You could have 100 people within an organization, and very, very few will be exactly the same, because they'll all need individual tweaks and changes and things that will be needed for their body and their shape and their working environment.
Shall I share a story with you guys? We had a new client, and he's been buying a chair online to what he's looking that he will fit in. He's a big man, very, very overweight, and he's been keep buying a chair actually online. Every time the chair comes in, he has to go through the hell to put it together, sit on it, and then he works out, right? That's not the right chair. He did it 3 times. He lost nearly about 800 pounds doing this. And at the 3rd time, the chair completely failed on him, and he approached us. So now we are in a process of making a chair for him through the DSC assessment. And that's what we telling people, that you need to be aware that there are so many products available, but they are not all ergonomic. People are buying a gaming chair thinking that's going to provide all the support to them, but they're the gaming chair. They're not designed to sit on a long period, So this kind of awareness, actually, I think is very, very important that people, and that's what you were talking about, that there's so much variety available, what to buy. And that's why the assessor like Graham come into an action. He can give guidance, advice, and just tell people like, look, for your body shape, this is going to work. That's not going to work for you. So, it's this kind of advice is very necessary for people to sit comfortably and, have that comfort to work for the longer period of time.
Yeah. So for someone like yourself as well, Karim, how important is it that, you know, that assessor that you send in, for example, has got access to, you know, a big product range in order to be able to supply that end user with the right equipment?
Yeah, but that's pretty much everything, isn't it? That's very, very important for an assessor to have accessibility to all this product range, that they can pick and choose what is required for that person. So yeah, that's very, very important.
Okay. So, you know, as a supplier, are you constantly looking for, you know, more equipment, more ranges, etc., to open up into?
I mean, I'm very, very picky person. You know, I'm very, very OCD about it when it comes to picking anything, because rather than, you know, like having access to 100,000 products, why can't I have the access to the product which can work for pretty much a set number of people, actually, you know? So that's what I'm looking. So this morning I had a conversation with a guy in America. We're looking to get some electric height adjustable desk, actually. But what has it got? It's got the sensor underneath. So there's a little child, if that walks under the table, the table would not come down. And you know, it's this kind of feature that we are looking for, actually, when people are working from home, because there are the kids around. I did a post of the day, and I saw this guy. He did a full setup on an ironing board. He put a workstation on the ironing board, the laptop there.
Yeah.
And it's literally a recipe for a disaster for anyone. If there's a little kid walk into the room, pull one cable, and the whole system gonna fall into the little child, actually, right? So it's a full health and safety perspective. People need to have a look when they're doing their setup at home.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective as an assessor, I know what you're saying in terms of being picky, but I'm picky. But in the other way, for me as an assessor, I think it's really important that I've got a complete bag of things to be able to recommend for someone. And it might be that, for example, over the years, you know, I've found that this manufacturer of height adjustable desking or this manufacturer of seating, their range just does not accommodate everything that I need it to accommodate for everybody that I meet. So what I'm always looking for is that there's all of those products available out there in order to find the right one for the right people. But I appreciate what you're saying, that you're looking for a particular quality, etc. But
I'm a quality man. You know, for me, it's quality over quantity. I don't want to sell the quantity. I want to sell a quality stuff which people will really enjoy, which people will really admire for a longer period of time. You know, and that's why all our chairs come with the warranty, depending how they're using the chairs. You know, and that's very, very important. And people and the buyers need to have this confidence.
I agree. I think quality is absolutely essential, but actually making sure that you've got the range and depth of products, you know, so that actually you can cater for every condition, etc. I mean, it is important as well. So it's and this is something that is an important part of this conversation around DSE.
Yeah.
I think it's an important thing for us to get over.
But there's the one thing my parents always told me when they used to run the business, right? My parents used to have a massive business. They said the more choices you give, people are going to go and pick and choose, and they're going to become more confused. Why not to make it simple?
Yeah, but that's the job.
Some people may not agree to it.
I would agree, but then that's the job of the assessor is to use their knowledge and their expertise to hone that in for people. So the person, that's the point. This isn't a sales process. This is an assessment process, and it's the job of the assessor to actually identify for that person what the best things are, because actually most people haven't really got a clue, and they will probably buy on aesthetics as opposed to or what they think is going to be good for them as opposed to what is going to be
Steve,
good for
I
them.
don't know if you agree with me. I think the bigger piece which is missing actually is education behind it. You know, how many people know, right? Okay, what ergonomics is. You know, so that's what I'm posting on LinkedIn very frequently about, like, how we can educate our younger generation from now to teach them about the ergonomics, which they can take it to their professional career. And when they retire, actually, you know, at least they will know that's the right way of of working, actually.
Yeah, we both totally agree with you on that. I mean, that's what we were talking about right at the beginning of the program, is that, you know, this it all comes down to teaching young children right from an early age about
and I think this is the biggest part. I know. Yes. And you know what, when we talk about mental health, well-being, and all this kind of thing, this is a bigger part of that. If people not sitting and working comfortably, that will impact their productivity. That will, they will create so many concerns about their health, overall health and well-being. It's a cost of absenteeism to a company if they do not provide a right set of equipment for their employees. And I think company must need to understand that, look, that's a cost actually going in a bin, actually, right? It's not an investment. That's a cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Karim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks,
Steven,
Karim.
No
thanks as usual for joining us. Thanks
back
for
next week.
Yes, absolutely. Back next week, Wednesday, I think, hopefully midday. And we'll be back for that. And we've got some special guests coming up next week. But thanks everyone for joining us. If you've been listening to this on Spotify, you will have loved all of the imagery that we were showing you on the screen. It was tremendous, and you'll need to look up Karim and Steven online in order to see their wonderful faces. But until then, have a good week, and we'll speak to you next week. Bye.
Thanks, Graham. See you next week.
Bye.
Cheers, Karim. Bye.